I was in a completely different world when a man with a much larger than usual manhood gave me pleasure. I had already experienced several climaxes since I walked into that motel room an hour or so ago, and all of them, in my opinion, were much better than anything I had ever experienced with Jack, with whom I lived for 10 years. Whatever guilt I felt about cheating on my husband was soon eclipsed by a feeling of incredible pleasure. In fact, I wasn't even sure why I was doing this. Everything was great between Jack and me. He always treated me like a queen, doted on me, bought me gifts and flowers on a whim just to say I love you, and the sex between us was good, although it had died down a bit lately. We had 2 wonderful children, and overall everything was great. But for some strange reason, I decided to give myself to Mike. Maybe it was the months Mike spent in the office, seducing me with his compliments, and the sly glances he gave me. Maybe it was the thrill of doing something behind Jack's back. Or maybe it was the gossip I heard about Mike's giant manhood from the other girls in the office. Perhaps it was all of the above. At first I was worried about how it would affect my marriage and family, but all of that disappeared when I walked into the room. Now all I cared about was absorbing as much as I could from this man in the short time we would spend together, even if it meant getting pregnant with his child. By this time, all thoughts of Jack had flown from my mind. There was no longer any feeling of guilt, only the need for another climax. I thought that I would make amends to my ignorant husband. Maybe I would even teach him to do what Mike did to me. After all, Mike, the man who was now ravaging me unconscious on the bed in that cheap motel room, had made me experience a mind-blowing climax. He fell on the bed next to me, and we fell asleep in each other's arms, promising each other to repeat the performance. I woke up and looked at the clock on the bedside table next to me. The clock showed 8:30, which gave me enough time to clean up and return home. I told Jack that I would be working late, but would be home by 10:30 at the latest. The motel was only a half-hour's drive from my home, so I had plenty of time to get cleaned up and return home to my husband. I looked to the other side of the bed and noticed that Mike had already left. I didn't remember him leaving, and thought it was strange that he went home to his wife without telling me anything. I decided to tell him everything I thought when I saw him at work the next day. I also noticed that his side of the bed looked as if no one had ever been there. Strange, I thought, but decided that he was probably as neat as he was talented. I went into the bathroom, examined myself, and noticed that other than a slight swelling between my legs, Mike had left no noticeable marks on me. That was a good thing, I thought, since I didn't want to have to explain any strange bruises or marks on my body. I took a very long shower, using 2 douches to clean myself up as much as possible. I didn't want to risk delivering Mike's bodily fluids to Jack's house, at least not yet. After carefully examining myself, I put my work clothes back on and prepared to leave, taking another quick look around the room to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything. I threw down my room key, then looked around to make sure no one I knew could see me. The only person I noticed was a rather strange-looking man in an old-fashioned gray business suit standing on the corner and looking at me. He seemed somehow familiar to me, but I could not remember him. He held a cigarette in one hand and kept the other in his pocket. However, what struck me was the lack of any natural color. He looked like a character straight out of an old black-and-white TV show from the 1960s. I returned to my car, got into it, and noticed that the interior was covered in dust and smelled musty, as if the car had been sitting idle for a long time. It's strange. Just a few hours ago, everything was different, I thought. I rolled down the window to ventilate it and tried to start the car. At first, it wouldn't start, but after I pressed the gas pedal a few times, it came to life and black smoke came out of the exhaust pipe. I pressed the gas pedal a few times to make sure the car would start. Starting to make a mental note to ask Jack to take a look at it in the morning, I headed home wondering if Jack would notice any changes in me. Let's hope he doesn't even notice, I thought. I returned home a few minutes before 10 and saw 2 strange cars in my driveway. This is strange, I thought. Jack didn't say anything about having company. The house also seemed a little different to me. All the curtains were wrong, and the landscaping had been completely changed. Of course, Jack couldn't do all this in one day, and certainly not without consulting me first, I thought. I double-checked the address to make sure I was at the right house, then parked on the street. Jack had some explaining to do, I told myself. I got out of the car and went into the house, noticing that everything was wrong. There was strange furniture in the living room. All my photos and precious trinkets were gone, replaced. And to make matters worse, there was an older black couple sitting on the couch looking at me strangely. "Who are you people, and why are you in my house?" I asked. The man stood up and looked at me strangely. "I'm Mark Johnson," he said. "And this is my wife Linda," he added, pointing to the attractive woman sitting next to him. "Who could you be, miss, and why are you in our house?" "My name is Emily Sanders, and I have lived in this house with my husband Jack for the last 8 years," I said. "I don't understand what's happening." "Miss, I think you might want to leave now," Mark said. "We bought this house from Mr. Sanders a year ago after his divorce became final." "Divorce?" I asked in shock. "What kind of divorce? I was just here this morning with my husband before leaving for work." Mark began to approach me. "Miss, I really think you should leave before I have to call the police." "Yes, please call the police," I said. "Something is going on here, and I intend to get to the bottom of it. This must be one of Jack's pranks." Mark picked up his phone and dialed 911. After speaking to the dispatcher, he hung up and spoke to me. "The police will be here in a few minutes," he said. "You can sit down if you want to wait for them here," he added, motioning for me to sit in the deep chair next to the sofa. I sat down, wondering what I should do next. I pulled out my smartphone and suddenly realized that it was dead. This was also strange since I always kept it charged so that Jack or the children could contact me at any time. "Sorry to bother you, but can I please use your phone to call my husband?" I asked. "Of course, no problem," Mark said, handing me his phone. I dialed Jack's number from memory but received a message saying the number was no longer in use. Distraught, I tried to dial my parents' number but received the same answer. I also tried to call Jack's parents but received a quick, busy signal. Dejected and with no choice, I returned the phone to Mark. "Are you saying that you bought this house a year ago from my husband?" I asked. Mark nodded. "Yes, we did," he said. "He sold it to us at a very good price and said it was because of a divorce." "Did he say anything about why he was getting a divorce?" I asked. Linda spoke. "He mentioned something about a cheating wife," she said, looking at me suspiciously. I was shocked. How could Jack have found out about this so soon after my first date with Mike? Poor guy. I could tell he was heartbroken, and these poor children. I felt so sorry for them. By this time, I was already in tears. My life and marriage had crashed and burned without me even knowing it. Shortly after, a police car with lights flashing pulled up to the house. 2 policemen appeared at the door. Mark spoke to them first and then invited them inside. I stood up as they walked inside. "Please show us some identification, miss," one of the officers said. I opened my purse and took out my driver's license. The officer looked at it, then turned to me. "Is this some kind of joke, ma'am?" he asked. "This license is empty." "What?" I asked, looking at the driver's license. The laminated card the officer was holding was completely blank. There wasn't even a photograph under the lamination. "Do you have any other identification?" asked the officer. "I have something in my purse," I said. But when I opened my purse, I discovered that all my other cards were completely blank. "I don't understand," I said. "There should be credit cards, an ATM card, my social security card, but they're all empty." "Can you at least tell us your name?" asked another officer. "Maybe there's something in the system." "Of course," I said. "My name is Emily Sanders, and I live on W. Highland Park Road with my husband Jack. I work as a paralegal at the Jenkins law firm downtown. Surely someone there can vouch for me." The officers scowled at each other before turning their attention back to me. "Did you say Emily Sanders, ma'am?" asked the second officer. "Yes," I said. "Emily Sanders." "It's spelled Emily," I said. "Sorry, ma'am. You'll have to come with us to the station so we can confirm your identity," the first officer said. "We apologize for intruding on your evening, guys," he said to Mark and Linda. The officers walked me to the police car and placed me in the back seat. After locking me inside, one of the police officers walked up to my car and rummaged through my glove compartment, pulling out some documents. They drove in silence to the police station where I was fingerprinted and taken to what appeared to be an interrogation room. Half an hour later, the door opened and a plainclothes detective entered the room with a folder in his hands. He sat down opposite me and placed the folder in front of him. He went through all the preliminary procedures, informing me of my rights and assuring me that I was not suspected of any crime. "All I want to do is confirm your identity, okay?" he asked. I nodded. You said your name was Emily Sanders, right? He asked. Yes, I said. And you told our officers that you live at 1501 W Highland Park Road with your husband Jack, he added. That's true, I said. You also said that you work at the Jenkins law firm as a paralegal, correct? He asked. Yes, that's true, I replied. We have a little problem here, Mrs. Sanders, the detective said. Let's start with the fact that your fingerprints don't exist. I don't mean they're not in the system. I mean you don't have fingerprints. It looks like they weren't even removed with acid, they simply don't exist. That's not all. We checked the records for this address and discovered that it was purchased by Mark and Linda Johnson a year ago from one Jack Sanders. According to court records, the house was sold as part of a divorce settlement between Jack and Emily Sanders, he said. I was shocked. What was all this talk about divorce? But I'm still married to my husband. I saw him just this morning. I don't understand how this is possible, I said through tears. Look, miss, I'm just going by what's in the court records. Tell me, please, where were you tonight? Asked the detective. I was at the Gaslight Motel, room 127, I said quietly. And what were you doing there? He asked. I was, with a man, I said, looking at the floor. What did you do with this man? Asked the detective. We fooled around, I said. You had sex, right? He asked. I nodded my head. Yes, I said. And can you identify the man you were with? Yes, I said. Mike Hawkins, my boss at the law firm. I see, said the detective. Have you gotten into the habit of cheating on your husband? I looked shocked. No, I do not. It was the first and last time, I promise, I said. Interesting, said the detective. The file we have on you includes a very detailed report from a local private investigator hired by your ex-husband. According to the private investigator's report, you were seen with Mr. Hawkins numerous times at the same motel over several months. I shook my head. No, this is wrong, I said. I went there with him only once today. The detective sighed and leaned back in his chair, looking at me. Miss, it so happens that I know the senior partners of Jenkins. I called this evening and was told that one Emily Sanders and her supervisor, one Mike Hawkins, were fired almost a year ago for violating the company's anti-adultery policy, he said. But that is not all. He pulled a photograph out of the folder and placed it on the table in front of me. The photo showed a woman lying on a hotel bed, her eyes open and her face gray. The woman looked exactly like me, and to make matters worse, she was wearing the exact same outfit as me. My eyes widened and I raised my hand to my mouth in shock. This photograph was taken about 3 months ago, miss, the detective said. According to responding officers, Emily Sanders of 1501 W Highland Park Road was found dead in room 117 of the Gaslight Motel 3 months ago. An autopsy revealed that Mrs. Sanders died from an overdose of sleeping pills, apparently taken with large quantities of alcohol. So, miss, can you please explain to me how it is that a woman who looks and dresses exactly like the woman found dead in a motel room 3 months ago is now walking around my precinct? He asked. And how did it happen that you just ended up in the same room in which this woman died? I shook my head in shock. No, this can't be, I exclaimed. I'm not dead. I'm right here. I do not know what's going on. Please help me. At least tell me where my family is. Please, I can't contact anyone. Well, miss, I don't know where Mr. Sanders is now, but I understand he moved out of town after his divorce. I know for a fact that his former in-laws died shortly after Mrs. Sanders' body was found. Oh my God, no. Please, please tell me my parents are still alive, I begged through tears. I'm sorry. If you really are Mrs. Sanders' ex, and I'm not ready to admit it, then I can't honestly tell you about it, he said, sending me into hysterics. Miss, I think you need professional help. I'm going to call the county behavioral center and have you moved to their facility until we get this all figured out, he said, pulling out his phone. I shook my head. No, please don't do this. I do not know what's going on. You have to believe me. Just let me talk to my husband. I can't do this, ma'am. I don't even know who you really are. You look like the late Mrs. Sanders. You dress like her. You seem to know some intimate details of Mrs. Sanders' life. You even drove Mrs. Sanders' car, although I'm not sure how you managed to start it after sitting there for so long. By the way, the registration plates on this car expired a while ago, so we will impound it until you can prove ownership and update the registration. Right now, I think you need to discuss this with a mental health professional. Please stay here, he said as he walked out the door. I laid my head on the table, sobbing. This shouldn't have happened, I thought. Of course Jack will come and save me. The door opened, and two large men in strange clothes entered the room. As they began to put it on me, I realized I was being put in a straitjacket and began to struggle. No, no, please don't do this to me, I said. No, no, oh no, I screamed again and again. But the men continued to put clothes on me until I could no longer move my arms. No, I screamed as one of the men injected something into my neck. In a few seconds, my world plunged into darkness. Thursday, May 12th, 2016, 11:30 a.m. Wake up, dear, said a male voice. Wake up. Are you okay, Emily? Wake up. I slowly opened my eyes and saw my husband's face. Emily, you had a nightmare, but it's over. Wake up, darling, he said. As my mind slowly shook off the dream, I realized I was in my bed with my husband, Jack. I instantly threw my arms around his neck and covered his face with kisses. Oh my God, Jack, is that really you? I asked. Of course, silly. Who else could be in our bed? He asked. Hold me, Jack, please, I cried. I missed you so much. Jack hugged me as tightly as he could. He loved hugging this beautiful woman, but he thought, what the hell is she talking about? I'm right here, he said. I'm not going anywhere. You better not go anywhere, I said, having calmed down a little. I looked at my husband. Jack, I said, I have something to confess, and I'm afraid you might get really angry with me. He looked at me with concern. Jack, I almost made a terrible mistake, I said. Almost? He asked. Jack, please don't hate me, but I have to tell you this. You know we promised to never keep any secrets from each other, no matter how bad they were. Yes, dear, I know. You can talk to me about anything. You know that, right? He asked. I nodded. Yes, I know, but it's really bad. Have you met my boss, Mike Hawkins? Jack knew him well. They met at a law firm's Christmas party, and Jack could tell he was a classy jerk who considered himself God's gift to the female sex, essentially a legend in his own imagination. He could also tell that Mike was trying to stick his hooks in his private parts into me. Yes, I remember him well, Jack said. He's been trying to get me to stay after work for a long time, except he doesn't want to work, if you know what I mean, I said. You mean he wants to get under your skirt, Jack said, his mood darkening. I can understand that. You are a beautiful, sexy woman. What man in his right mind wouldn't want to have sex with you? If we weren't married, I'd be flirting with you myself. What I don't like is the fact that he knows you're married. Yeah, well, he wanted me to meet him at a motel for sex, I said, looking down. Oh, really? Jack said. And you agreed? No, not really, I said. But in fact, I didn't disagree with it either. I just kind of blew him off, but he expects me to meet him tomorrow. I can't do it, but I'm afraid it will affect my work if I don't. Well, I can assure you that it will affect our marriage if you do this. And yes, it could also affect your job, Jack said. You know that I will not tolerate infidelity, and your company has strict rules prohibiting adultery. You could both be fired, and yes, I would file for divorce. I know, I said. I haven't done anything with him yet, but I'm afraid. I know he's been with a lot of other girls in the office, and they all say he's a nice guy who uses weed to get his way. You believe me, don't you? Of course I believe you, Jack said. You forget that we have been married for 10 years, and before that we knew each other for 5 years. You've never been able to keep anything a secret from me, and the guilt will eat you alive. While we're on the subject, I noticed that you've been a little out of sorts the last couple of days. At first I thought it was just work-related, but now I think I know the real reason, right? I lowered my eyes and nodded my head. Yes, I said quietly. I've been thinking a lot about this for the last 2 days. I don't want to lose my job, but I couldn't live without you. And I couldn't live with myself if I hurt you and the kids like that. What should I do? You're kidding, right? Asked Jack. You are a smart, educated woman, Emily. Do you really have to ask? Or do you want me to spell it out for you? You don't have to do this, Jack. I guess I just needed some validation. I know what I'll do, I said, getting out of bed. I went to my closet and pulled out a dress that I intended to wear the next day. It was a beautiful dress with slight cleavage and fell a few inches above the knees. It wasn't overtly sexy, but it still showed off my curves well. I pulled it out of the closet and threw it in the trash. I never want to see that dress again, I said. Jack looked surprised. It was quite an expensive dress, he said. Are you sure you want to do this? I sat down on the bed. Yes, I said. And tomorrow I'll tell Mike not just no, but damn no. Then I'm going to ask for a transfer to another department. Maybe my salary will be cut, but I don't care. If they don't give it to me, I'll quit. Our marriage is more important to me, and I will do everything to keep us together. Can you ever forgive me? Of course I can, Jack said. I'm a little mad that you didn't tell that bastard no right away, but at least now you're doing the right thing. I hugged my husband as if my life depended on it. I can't believe I was so stupid. Jack, please hug me and tell me you love me, I said. Jack hugged me back and kissed my forehead. Of course I love you, Emily, and always have, he said. But I think we need to have a serious talk about this after you settle down. Maybe even get some counseling. I can't believe you were so trusting that you fell in love with him like that. I understand, I said. I promise that this will never happen again. I looked at the TV on the wall opposite our bed and saw him. The man I had seen on the street corner in my nightmare. Jack, who is that man on TV? I asked. This is Rod Serling, honey. They're having a Twilight Zone marathon. Why did you ask? I saw him before, but I didn't know who he was, I said. How is this possible? He died back in 1975, Jack said. He was in my nightmare. He didn't actually do anything, he just stood there and watched. It was black and white, just like on TV, and it was just, I don't know, weird, I said. Interesting, said Jack. Someday you will have to tell me about this dream. Jack got out of bed and headed towards the door. I'll go downstairs and get myself something to drink. Do you want anything? Coca-Cola? Water? I would like some water, please, I said. After Jack left the bedroom, I thanked the heavens for the dream I had. I suddenly realized that I had almost entered the twilight zone of betrayal.